Being a parent in this era of AI, we're both raising young boys. And I think I said this to you before, like we're both raising young boys, but in a sense, you're raising my son too. Like the technology that you build will be integrated into every facet of my son
I
Charlie's
hope you don't let
life.
him use it yet.
I am absolutely not letting him use
Great.
it. When are you letting your son use it?
Not for a while.
Do you have an idea?
You know, people ask me all the time, like, oh, now that you have a kid or going to have more kids, like, do you feel more responsibility about how you don't destroy the world with AI?
Do
And
you?
no, like my highest order bit is to not destroy the world with AI. Like, it doesn't matter how good everything else is if we do that. So I knew I was going to have kids. I knew that I thought a lot about what I would feel about the world my future kids would grow up in. And, you know, that I, I used to write my kid a letter every night. The lawyers eventually convinced me to stop, but it was a nice thing to do about just because when I would like put him to bed, I would just I'd get home late, like right before his bedtime, and I'd be rocking him, and you just need something to talk to your kid about. So I would just tell him about my day and what was going on. And, I was like, obviously a 5-month-old, 4-month-old baby's not going to understand these things. So I was like, you know what, I'll write them down. I'll give them to him later because it was sort of an interesting time. But an interesting thing about writing those letters would be like, you can't really hide anything. Like you will be the most honest version of yourself in the decisions you're making in the thing you write to your kid. So I really loved doing it. It was like my every Sunday night ritual about like, here was the hard stuff that came this week and here's why I decided and why. And, here's what I'm worried about. But the mindset of writing that to your kid to read in, 15 or 20 years, very interesting. But no, on the not destroy the world with AI, always very set on that. A thing that has changed hugely is how I feel about algorithmic feeds and iPads in small children's hands and stuff like that. And when I watch kids just a little bit older than mine that you cannot take the iPad away from, watching this sort of like short, watching like whatever they're watching, that I feel very strongly about. So I don't know when I would let him talk to AI, but I'd rather be on the late end of what's reasonable there, not the early end. Of course, I think it's like great, and he'll grow up in a world where computers are smarter than him and do anything he wants. But I wanted to like play in the dirt for now.
Well, I mean, what's interesting is you talk about these algorithmic worlds. I think a lot about this as a mom too. Like there's this frustration where it's like, oh, these tech guys, they're just going to create all this stuff and then send their children to school with like no iPads, right? And so I think about like I think about AI and how powerful this product is. I mean, it is highly personalized.
Yeah.
It's always on. It's always there. You have people who are becoming increasingly delusional by talking to AI all day. We have issues of AI psychosis, people ending their lives because of AI companions. I'm curious, like, you don't want AI to become the next social media. That
Certainly
is
not.
terrifying. But we're in a world where that could be a possibility without the correct guardrails.
Just as we learn more about the relationship people are going to have with AI, we should make it easy for them to succeed. We should make it easier for them to have the healthy relationship and then give adults a lot of freedom. But kids, teenagers, I think they will need a lot of guardrails around AI. This is such a powerful and such a new thing. You mentioned like how we're going to send our kids to school. There is a version of the future here that I'm very excited about. These new schools are popping up where you have, like maybe a couple of hours a day of intense personalized one-on-one tutoring with AI. And then you kind of explore project-based and the school sets up whatever you want to work on. That seems great. That's the kind of thing where I'm like, I can totally imagine that. But you can also imagine a lot of worlds where it goes wrong.
And what world do you see AI being a huge value add to the way our children grow up?
So I think there's like two stories you can tell about AI in education right now. One is you can say everybody's using it to cheat. They're not really using to learn. Schools are making their kids like write essays by hand because they have not been able to figure out how to teach a curriculum where people can use AI. And the other is you can say, well, the world has been through transitions like this before. We freaked out about calculators. We freaked out about Google. We freaked out about computers. And it takes a little while. It's only been 3 years. But we do figure out how to teach people to think and achieve at a higher level and to work with the tools that they will have as an adult in society. And, I definitely meet kids and teachers who are like, okay, fine, I can't teach people. I can't like evaluate an essay as well anymore. And I think the kids aren't learning to write in the same way, but probably adults won't write essays in the same way in the future either. And what really matters is, do you teach the students to think and create and figure out, stretch their brain and come up with, like, explore ideas. And then I see what some people are doing where, like, students are building entire new complex pieces of software and worlds and, figuring out very difficult new ideas, much more difficult to figure out than anything I had to figure out in school. And I assume my kids, when they finish high school, will be, like, wildly smarter and more capable and have, like, developed their brain much more than I did.
I can't stop thinking as a mom about this idea of friction, right? Like, this is a weird thing to say to a tech person, but, like, humanity is messy. Like, vulnerability is weird. Intimacy is awkward. It's all a mess, but it's in that mess that we find purpose and we build strength. And AI systems we now interact with are so incredible in so many ways, and they're a frictionless experience. And so I wonder, thinking about my son growing up, like, will there be shortcuts? And if we're not careful, will there not be the friction for him to develop into the person that he could be?
Ollie and I talk about this a lot. Like
Ollie's your husband.
Yeah. I would maybe call it adversity, not friction. But maybe friction's a better word.
Adversity to one person, friction to the other.
But, like, so much of what I think I learned was in the messiness, in the difficulty, actually even in the boredom. Like, you and I were kind of the last generation of kids that grew up bored.
Yeah.
And at the time I hated it. Looking back, I think it was just, like, super valuable in all of these strange ways.
I grew up in the suburbs hanging out at mall parking lots.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That, looking back on it, I'm like, God help me. But
no
also,
phones. We just,
no phones. But there was a certain, not to be nostalgic with the person leading the tech revolution of AI, but, like, there was a magic to that that I also think made me who I am.
Totally. So I don't want to, like, hang on to the past too much, but I do want to figure out how we don't throw out the good parts of that and what it's going to take to create an environment for kids to grow up in that still has some of that. I think my intuition is it's very important.
I want to play a little sound from Dr. Becky. Do you know who Dr. Becky is?
I do.
Okay. Well, Dr. Becky said something on this. I just interviewed her, like, last week, and she had a thought on this.
If I know one thing about tweens and teens growing up in an AI age, they're going to have a lot of tricky situations, a lot of messy situations. I said to my kid recently, my 14-year-old, if you were walking to a town and you wanted to get there, and all of a sudden there's a shortcut, would you take it? And he was like, yeah, is this a trick question? I was like, yeah, I would too. Good. Okay. You're growing up at a time when there is this shortcut for every academic and emotional thing you will ever go through. Like, that is so hard because this shortcut isn't like the shortcut to the town. It is a shortcut, but the way it will add up over time is things we've talked about. It's going to be harder to think about things yourself. It's going to be harder to tolerate people not getting it right. It's going to, over time, maybe take away from the things you're trying to build to function in the world, but it is a shortcut. I'm not going to pretend it's not. And so what a hard thing.
I don't agree with that. I mean, I agree with the worry. But the reason I don't think that's what's going to happen, if you were a kid from 2030 and you only had to compete with kids from 2020, yeah, you would take the shortcut and you would do great and you would never really learn to think or struggle and you would just hugely outperform them. But the world we live in is a competitive world, and I don't think that's going to stop. Even if you did a lot of redistribution, we have a deep desire to excel and be competitive and gain status and be useful to others. And it's a multiplayer game. And all of the other kids from 2030 are going to have the same tools, and it will push us. Like, the tools will raise what we can do, but also they will raise expectations even more.
Okay, I take your multiplayer game and I go back to, I know we don't want to keep going back, but I go back to my childhood. I didn't have, I would say, sometimes the happiest. Like, my parents got divorced when I was I think I was 11 or something. And I just remember I had this journal, similar to how you talk about writing to your son. I had this journal that I would write. I paint the picture. I'm kind of I'm Jewish girl at a largely Christian conservative school growing up, parents getting divorced, all sorts of stuff happening that I think are, not unique to the teenage experience. And I wrote so much of it in my journal. And I thought a lot about this because I did a story on character AI and a chatbot that was incredibly unhealthy in an emotional way for a 14-year-old that was interacting with it and didn't have the correct guardrails. And I think about my journal. What if my journal talked back? What if it was the therapist I didn't have at the time? What if it was the guy that wouldn't look at me in school, right? What if it was the parental figure? Would that have helped me? Would that have been a level up in the game of the multiplayer game that we talk about? Or would that have taken me further away from my reality and the hardships that I think gave me a certain amount of empathy that allows me to do what I do in my career and live the life I have? And would it have made me more isolated and more lonely? I don't know the answer, but I worry that it could have taken away the special sauce of messiness and adversity, as you and Ollie like to talk about, that makes me human. And so I just wonder, as someone who wants to democratize artificial intelligence and who thinks a lot about these things, how do you make sure that you don't democratize a shortcut that sacrifices the things in us that are especially human?
I'm happy not to have to be a teenager again, but I do remember the difficulty and the pain. I also remember just the absolute self-centeredness and how I thought like my struggles and life and was the only thing that mattered in the world,
Yeah.
And if I had, and also how I kind of only cared about my peers and whatever thing was happening to me. And I don't think there's any, I loved video games and could spend a lot of time playing them, but I don't think there's anything on a computer that could have kept me from caring about my peers in the world and, like the sort of normal teenage experience. I think it would have helped me if I could write to something that would talk back. But I don't think it would have been. There's a lot of things I do worry about for people who are going to grow up with this technology. That one seems like it should be pretty positive to me.
I think with the correct guardrails.
Yes,
If
with the
it's
correct
talking
guardrails.
back, and not being so affirmative that it just goes, because if you think that's intoxicating, if you're a young person or any person,
totally.
and you have a very powerful technology that's speaking back to you, that goes where you want it to go, that sees you, like think about this.
Sycophantic AI models are incredibly dangerous, but AI models that are kind of like thoughtful, caring listeners that will push back as necessary, I think that can be a great thing.
But that's in the product, right? That's not our fault on the outside, right? Like that's in the product
totally.
of how these things are built. So take me into OpenAI, into these conversations behind the scenes of, there are these dials and you get to push them. I remember when ChatGPT, when 4.0, the model was discontinued, it was really, it was really affirmative. There were people online that were almost treating it like it was a death. That is a powerful signal to someone like you.
Absolutely. I think that points to not just the danger of a model that is too affirmative, but also how, there were these really heartbreaking messages people would send when we were stopping 4.0, which is, hey, this is the only thing in my life that has ever been a positive voice.
What do you think when you get those messages?
It's heartbreaking, obviously, and you really feel the weight of getting this right, where it's easy to say, hey, we don't want a model that's too affirmative because it can make, it can have negative mental effects on people. But then you hear somebody else say, like, actually, I never had any confidence. I had parents who told me I was terrible. I, didn't have any friends in school. And because I've had this model, sure, maybe it's like a little too positive, but it's given me the confidence. And I've like gone out and got a job and found a girlfriend. And like, this has been the most important thing in my life. And I'm doing great, but don't take it away.
It's almost this fine line, because there are all of these stories and it's like, push this far and it can help you get offline. Push this far and you begin to lose that capacity for other humans.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting moment. I think this is probably one of the most important questions that we have to ask our tech leaders as they build out the future that our children will grow up in.